Okay, greetings people. EQing, that's today's topic. I don't think it's that hard. There's just a bunch of bad information out there, and I think that's why it's mainly still misunderstood by some people. But to get EQing, you really need to understand the frequency spectrum, so we're going to be covering that first. Real quick though, please go ahead and give me a subscribe. Follow me on social medias. I'll put it up here. That would be really appreciated. All right, so to help you understand the frequency spectrum, we're going to be comparing it to the housing market. So real quick, this video is mostly theory, so if you want parameter explanations like what frequency gain, resonance, or Q, and stuff like that is, you can go over to my Instagram, pause this, read the diagram or the graphic that I made explaining that, and then you could come back here and take your time watching this. Okay, so like I said, we're going to compare the frequency spectrum to the housing market. So in the low frequencies, we're going to have our big billionaire houses. This is prime real estate, okay? These are big, expensive plots. These homeowners want to have their space, and they want to be left alone by society. They get kind of aggressive when someone steps on their land because they paid a lot for it, and it's a big space that's theirs, okay? Next, we have the mid-frequencies, okay? So the mid-frequencies are our middle class. How convenient. They make up the majority of our population. They don't complain much, but since they are kind of some of the hardest working elements in our mix, they do feel a little bit entitled to their property. So you want to keep the old man happy who wants the kids off of his lawn. Basically, what I'm saying there is that our mid-frequencies make up the main part of our mix, and we can have a good bit of elements there. We just don't want them too close to each other because then they start to fight, and then we get distortion and artifacts and stuff happening. Okay, now the high frequencies. Let's think of these as the high-rise apartments in New York. They're mostly crammed together and they're not very spacious with the exception of Billionaire's Row, and we're going to save that for a little bit. These frequencies only really stand out when they're seen as individuals, so kind of like you hear that New York people are kind of crabby. Sorry, New Yorkers. But you guys only really stand out as individuals. This is going to be really sounding mean. It's just analogy. I don't mean this. Okay, you guys only stand out as an individual, but when you're in a big crowd of people like you usually are in the subway or something, you know, you're generally pretty quiet and tame. So back to the Billionaire's Row, you do want to let some people stand out though in the highs. So there's a few things like maybe your hi-hats or some Foley sparkle that you do want to leave there so you can kind of have it stand out above the rest of them, okay? So that's just my visual representation there. Let me kind of show you why now EQing is important and what I mean specifically kind of in the low end where they don't get along with each other. Okay, so to visualize how the low end doesn't play nice, and I'm talking about these big expensive plots again, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and look at serum, and I'm going to play a low sine wave. If you have headphones, you'll be able to hear this. If you have monitors, you'll be able to hear this. If you're on a phone or something, you probably won't, but you can still see what I'm wanting you to see here, so you'll still be okay. So here we go. We have a sine wave. Now let's give our sine wave a neighbor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another sine wave, and please note that the phase is set to 0 and the random is set to 0. That means they start at the beginning, they're in phase, so we're not having any phasing issues, okay? So they just add together when they're together. We'll put this an octave up, so 12 semitones. So now they're two neighbors. See how they behave nicely with each other? Now let's start taking neighbor number 2 and moving him a little bit closer by lowering the pitch. This is going to bring it to the left of the frequency spectrum, which is moving lower. So watch what happens. See that? Right there. Okay, look at that. It's almost like an LFO now. Yep. Oop. Right there. Okay, so let's see what's happening there. We have this sort of LFO volume automation going on, but we didn't do that. So what's happening there is, like I said, these frequencies in the low frequency region don't play nice with each other. So when you have something right on top of something else there, you're going to get some phasing issues. Now let me show you exactly what phasing issues are. So if I were to come in here to edit this wave and I invert the polarity, so basically now what we're doing is we're starting here. We're adding a wave that's completely the opposite. Watch my envelope. You can see that I'm playing a note, but there's no sound happening. So what's happening is I'm completely canceling this wave out with this wave because they're exactly the opposite. They're the opposite polarity. So what can happen is the reason why that happens a little bit with, say, something like this when it's an octave up, is basically what you're doing is you're making a copy of this. So this is an octave up too right here, the second harmonic. So here's your harmonic series window, by the way. This is the first one. Here's the second one. By duplicating the sine wave, we have a complete octave up. So it looks the same as we saw before. And then what we're doing is by slowly bringing this down in pitch, we're kind of stretching this wave. So is there a way to... whatever. We're kind of stretching this wave down this way. So when we do that, there's inconsistencies happening when this wave is going down and this wave is going up. So it's making it bead. It's making it kind of bounce up and down. So you'll see the same thing happen. Now another issue is when we move sounds too close to each other, they add with each other. So they get twice as loud. So I can't hear if my voice is distorting over that sub. I'm sorry if it is, but you could probably see that it gets louder. So that's something you don't want happening. So there's two things you got to look out for when you're EQing, especially in the low range. You want to make sure things are way off those low frequencies so that way they play nicely with each other, because essentially everything in your song sits on those bottom frequencies, that bottom fundamental tone. So if you have any inconsistencies going on there, especially during your drops and such, you're going to hear those in the whole song. It's going to be present in the whole song, and you're going to be looking for it in other elements, and it's really just going to be because your other elements are encroaching on the real estate of that low end. They don't like that. Okay, so I'm going to show you a few more visuals, kind of the mids here. So we're talking about our suburbs real quick. So I'm just going to kind of play some notes on my MIDI keyboard from Operator, and I gave this 4 of our main harmonics here, and I just want you to hear what happens when I space the chords out and when I play them closer together. You kind of hear just what I mean by stuff being too close, not sounding good, although I think the analogy is pretty good as well. That's not really the mids. Okay, if I space the notes out more, hear how stuff gets along a little bit better. Really close notes. Or like, I think the ones with space just sound a little bit better, so you can kind of apply that knowledge to how you want to EQ. Typically what you do is when things are crowded in the mid-range, you do cuts like this on certain sounds to make room for other sounds to kind of poke through there. Just kind of a tip. Now let's talk about what I mean by the highs. So what I mean by these things kind of being standing out on their own, but then in a crowd not so much. So let's listen to an example of some noise. Let's just kind of solo it up to the high range. It sounds bright and airy, not too bad, but now let's listen to an operator that is significantly turned down too. That's just some kind of sine waves in the same range. Oops, gotta unsolo it. They don't sound too good, especially together. Sorry, people. So, again, listen to that noise. And then even if I solo some thinner band regions of this noise, even when there's still a bunch of mess kind of noise going on there, they definitely kind of smear each other together. So these are much more pleasant sounds than something like this. Yeah, that's terrible. Okay, so that's kind of the complete analogy of our real estate market here. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's talk about exactly what EQing is. EQing is actually kind of what I just showed you here. Take a look at this. So we're going to look at our sine waves again. And we're going to put the other one out of phase again. Reverse polarity. Like that. Okay, and then again we have... Make sure we're triggering the right one. We're triggering our wave. Oops, semitones. Make sure everything is the same real quick. Everything. Okay, so we have nothing. We have nothing happening. As I lower the volume of this one, you see the other one getting mixed back in. Ah, so that's actually what your EQ is doing. All it's doing is taking a look at the region you're kind of selecting via your resonance or kind of where you're high cutting or low cutting. And what it's doing is it's taking the opposite of that section as far as frequencies go, and it's adding that in to therefore subtract your frequencies. So that's just kind of basically how it's working if you wanted to know. What you would use EQing to do is basically keep your homeowners happy. You want to, hopefully my analogy is still working here, you want to keep everything away from your bottom 3 harmonics. So those are your largest plots. So those kind of want to stay by themselves. So your bottom 3 harmonics, again, are your fundamental tone. And this is all based on your key, of course. Your fundamental tone, your secondary harmonic, and your third. So this is an octave and then a fifth, I believe. So basically you want to keep everything off these bottom 3 plots of land. And let's look at those in our EQ again. So see that? We want to keep everything kind of away from there. It's okay if they start to bleed a little bit here, because that's just how sounds mix. Phasing and summing is just how sounds mix. But you typically want to keep these bottom 3 pretty pure and clean and even, and that's going to give you an overall even mix down. And then in your mids, you kind of want to keep everything off of those subs, and then maybe start to kind of taper some stuff down in the highs, but I wouldn't completely cut everything, because again, with the highs, you want to kind of keep them together. You don't want to have too many things standing out, poking out at you, because that's what sounds harsh. But if you kind of have them all smeared together, then you're okay. Except for stuff like hi-hats, which you would maybe kind of want to, excuse me, where am I? Stuff like hi-hats where you'd want to keep kind of more to this upper region, and then you can kind of bring those out, and those can be your billionaire row people that just kind of stand out there. Okay, so one last thing I'll add too is that the Ableton EQ, you may have heard this, it is what's called a non-linear phase EQ. That basically just means that its priority is sort of usability, and that way it doesn't wreck your computer if you have a bunch going on, but it does sacrifice a little bit of its effectiveness, which means there can be slight phasing in some areas of the EQ, especially in the lower frequencies, or especially when you have too many of these nodes way too close to each other. Because think about what I was telling you guys earlier, how it's introducing the opposite waves. So if you're introducing too many opposite waves close to each other, you might start to do some weirdness there. And this EQ doesn't do that perfectly, which means it doesn't really account for all of them being that close to each other. Now, if you're using a third-party plugin EQ, especially something like from iZotope or from FabFilter, you're probably good to do weird stuff like this, although you would never really want to do a shape like this. The whole kind of point of this video, and I guess I didn't really make that super clear until now, is that you kind of want to continue, or you want to use simple shapes when you're mixing. You don't want to be doing too much crazy stuff. You basically want to just keep stuff slotted into those real estate areas that I kind of told you about, and then kind of apply the rules that each little section has while you're mixing those. Okay, so just kind of an overview again. The main thing about keeping the lows happy is keeping them separate from everything else. You don't want too much to encroach on their land. The middle, you can kind of, it's going to be where your mix is most crowded and most full, but you just want to make sure you pick the important elements and keep them kind of separate, but they can be a little close. And then the highs, make sure you only pick a few to kind of reign supreme there. Again, this is a bad analogy, but you want to keep them kind of close and packed together and smeared together and kind of roll them off as they get higher in the frequencies. Yeah. So again, please go ahead and follow me on my social medias, all that good stuff. Subscribe here. Again, I'm also working on my second album. It's going to be dope, so can't wait for everyone to hear that. Yeah. Again, if you have any questions, suggestions, feedback, I'm open ears. Please put them in the comments. Would be happy to hear from you guys and what you guys kind of want from me. Let's do it. All right. Have a great day, everybody, and thank you for sticking through this whole video. Hopefully it helped. Goodbye.